Yeah, so again, so we need to address those issues. So again, this morning I'm going to be commenting. I made a lot of comments. All right, so we're going to be commenting on the whole event of what's been going on, and the offensive nature of what's been going on, and the importance of Jamaicans stepping up and being a part of their own country and their own lives. So one of the first things I want to address is I've been paying attention to the whole thing about the salary thing. And though we've been raising a lot of issues about the salary, the greater thing to recognize here, it's not about the salary alone. It's about the approach that this government has used and Andrew Holness has used to force things down the throat of people. And one of the offensive things, and he said it boldly as if, well, I'm going to do this and I don't care because I am the one to do it, because everybody else is scared to do it or they didn't want to do it. Now, the reason a lot of other governments probably didn't want to do it because they know that kind of formula is unfair in the first place. You can't have government dictating to the populace that we are going to take from the populace what they're not willing to have other parts of the economy or other members of the working population get, and put them subject them to a most horrendous economic system that the government is in putting in place, mostly exploiting everybody else for their own self-benefit. So this whole idea that trying to justify it, did it because we know people are going to be upset, but guess what? Somebody has to do it because previous governments didn't want to do it because out of fear of being criticized. Guess what? The other governments didn't want to do it because they know any such move or the decisions that were taken for this ridiculous pay hike was offensive not to the nation alone but to even the economic system and an insult to intelligent people. So that's one. So then, and I'm pretty sure I've heard quite a few people saying that. Secondly, you shouldn't have come out with anything like that, especially with you trying to change the constitution. What's the motivation behind that? And you're pushing a change of the constitution without the participation of the people. And to submit or come up with changes to the constitution and just have town hall meetings and say this is what we're going to be doing and then you must vote on it is not how engaging people in discussing changes in the constitution. That's dictating to people and forcing stuff down people's throat and then say, oh, you have an option, but you don't. Because if you decide on what changes are going to be made to the constitution and merely try to get people to vote on it, especially from a political perspective, then that's wrong. That's not changing the constitution. That's a political party forcing their philosophy on the people, and it's not necessarily what the people want. So that's another offensive thing. And why are you trying to push that through immediately after you've forced people or tried to force people to accept a ridiculous and exploitive and offensive pay hike for yourself? So the reality is that it must be rolled back. And I have to say to Jamaicans, I hear a lot of people out there, they're asking, and I'm literally saying they're asking the government to roll back these pay. You don't ask a government to roll back nothing. It's your country. You tell the government who work for you, we're not going to pay you that, so just take it off of the counter. You're not getting it. We're not doing it. And if you think you're going to get that, we're going to shut the country down. And I'm glad to see quite a few bloggers and organizations, including the church, calling for a boycott of the government and our everyday operations, as if nothing should be done or said. We just must accept what they're pushing down the throats. And that's why I'm saying, even with the constitutional change, separate it from the political parties, because you don't want this to be some system created by a political party that's going to push down the throats of the people, and people think they're voting for something that they want, when in truth and in fact this is a decision that's been made by somebody else. And then you're given no options, because if you only have this in front of you, you have to vote on that. That's not an option, and that's not participation. And the same thing happens is involving the whole salary thing. So we need to address all of that, and the government has to know, and people have to know, we're not begging the government anything. They work for us, and you must dictate to them what you want. So this whole offensive behavior, as if he's doing us a favor, and we better take it or else what? There's one thing I'd like to emphasize here is that the Constitution of Jamaica and our system of government, or democracy, calls for anybody to run in a general election, that wants to run in a general election, to become a representative of the people of Jamaica, and that should be based on the people's decision. I've heard some people, I was listening to Mr. Andrew Stevens' program the other day, and his guest, and there was a comment about somebody in Parliament that didn't have CXCs, or there are members of the Parliament who don't have CXCs. Now, a lot of people don't realize how offensive the suggestion is to say people must have CXCs to run in a general election or become a representative of the people. No, that's not how a democracy works. And I'll go right back to the United States as a point of reference. And you could look up the whole Jim Crow era in the United States, where before a person could vote in a general election, if they were black, they were forced in some cases, if they couldn't read or they were illiterate, they couldn't vote. If you didn't pay taxes, you couldn't vote. If you didn't do this, you couldn't vote. Now, those were deemed illegal and anti-democratic, and a taking of people's civil and human rights, and should be, because no country or no government should be based on your academic achievements. It's offensive, and that's one of the problems we have right now, because we have a lot of people in government who are predominantly, a large percentage of them are attorneys, and so they come from a certain culture and a certain behavior pattern, and they have a certain belief system, the vast majority of them. And so we have this attitude that, and some of it is arrogant. We're getting in there and we're going to enforce what we believe is the right thing, when in truth and in fact it's not. What we need are intelligent people who are sophisticated enough to understand what we want as a nation, and go in there and represent people on that platform. And certainly having a CXC thing, or what, being literate and all of that, is unimportant. What is important is that this person understand. And I'm going to point back to our history, that the vast majority of our heroes never had any degrees. Well, let me not say the vast majority. The large percentage of them didn't have any degrees, and in fact weren't formally educated. Buster wasn't formally educated, but he stood for the nation. He stood for a unified nation and fighting for those rights. He couldn't, based on a lot of the things I said about him, and some of it is probably exaggerated, he could even read or spell in keeping with the standards that's established in the educational system. But that wasn't important. The man stood for his nation and built it. And because those people stood up, then we had a strong political system in place. So that alone defeats this whole argument that if a person is in the Jamaica Parliament and has no CXC, should not even be mentioned. It's an insult to your very intelligence to suggest that. That's not democratic. That's how you hold back a nation. And in fact, education is relative. Because I can guarantee now a whole bunch of people who are in there, who are attorneys, especially young attorneys, who are teachers, who are educators, that, for example, the subject matter in CXC of history, that West Indian history or world history, a lot of the history that we've been taught in the CXC syllabuses are so wrong that, we wonder why they're still teaching it. For example, the whole concept of Columbus discovering the Caribbean, or Columbus or the Spanish were the first to come into the Caribbean from Europe, is utter nonsense, and it's been disproven. The first, because we had the Vikings, which is proven. We had Henry Sinclair, who came out of England, or the British political sovereignty or jurisdiction, We had some other saying something another who ended up in America. And these are things that's documented long before Columbus. And of course, we had the Olmecs all over Mexico and South America and Central America. They're still finding African skulls on the South American continent. And they came before Christ in the New World. We have the Black Caribs. We have, even Columbus talking about them when they got here, say, oh, there were black persons trading with the Tainos or Arawaks, whatever you want to call them, way before we got here. And they took, spearheads that they were trading with in Hispaniola, took it back to Spain, and when they did the chemical analogy of the composition of the metals, they found it came out of West Africa. So conjecture alone tells us that history that they're teaching people as West Indian history is so wrong. And that history was taught because they wanted to keep people down and keep them back, to say the only achievements black people accomplished was allowing themselves to be captured, taken out of Africa, turned into slaves, and we operate at the behest of Europeans. So we need to rethink our approach about trying to limit people to be in government because of their education. Wisdom doesn't come from being in school. Intellect doesn't come from being in school. So again, I'm going to suggest to the persons, and I'm mentioning this because I heard it on Mr. Andrew Stevens, this program, and his guest Radigan, or Mr. Radigan, they were jokingly laughing about somebody there and stool and all of that. A person who is arrogant, ignorant, and simply uncivilized in their behavior should not be in government. And those are the things we need to address when it comes to this whole concept of reorganizing our constitution. We know the present system of democracy is good. Democracy where the majority of people vote is good. But our present structure of government is bad because it gives rise to a number of exploitative issues that we've been experiencing from the time before independence, where we're underrepresented, where government officials go in and exploit the people and the economy. They come out being rich and powerful, and the population becomes poorer and poorer. We're talking about measuring performance. If people are elected, you can now have up a system that's going to assess their performance while they are in office, and think that should have some bearing on whether they stay in office or their being ability to stay in office comes from being elected, and being elected in a democratic process says that, assessment or not, if people vote to put them in, they have to go in. That's democracy. So what we have to do is educate persons to set up a political system where we have active education to teach people about the economy, how it affects them, as a regular ongoing process that's across the board, that's not political, so that when it comes to voting in individuals, people make educated decisions and not based on political organizations. One of the things I'm suggesting that we need to do in reforming the Constitution is to ban political organizations, but political parties. People can form organizations, yes, but make sure we structure our political system that we have persons, whether they're coming out of a village, a city, a town, that they come from the grassroots, support from the people within those communities, and they're voted on, they're sent into national politics from those communities. People vote, and from those people vote in a senator from Portland, they vote in a senator from Westmoreland, they vote in a member of the House of Representatives from St. James, from Kingston. And we have people going in there where individual people go in and vote for people, not on a political party basis, but because these persons have been put on a place or a list of potential candidates and they've been put on that list of candidates running in St. Mary, running in Portland, because the people selected these people and said, these are the persons we want to represent us. It's not based on your education. It's not based on your color, your creed, or all of that. So that when we vote people in, we're getting the best. That's how we get the best representatives. Because we are going to have people stepping up so that they say, I want to represent the nation. I'm going to go out and put a platform or a manifesto out there to say, this is what I'll be doing. And I allow people to vote. Not vote on a political base. You want to form an organization, that's fine. You want to put forward your slate of candidates, they must compete against ordinary people who are not affiliated with political parties. And so we dismantle this whole concept of a system where we control the population, and the population is easily controlled by political parties and their agendas. We eliminate this whole nonsense that we should have political parties selecting our candidates. No, selection of the candidates must be done in a general local election where people are put forward, whether again they belong to a political party or not, and allow people to vote on those persons so that we have the best people going forward. The best people going into politics or representing government or people shouldn't be based on the salary scale that's there. We want people to go in and say, this is what's there, this is what's making, and their salaries should be living wages like we've been advocating for everybody else. Because even at the salary scale that people are getting in, and people say, oh, they deserve a raise. They don't deserve a raise if the money is more than enough. How many private sector persons out there are making 9 million a year, 4 million a year, 5 million a year, 6 million a year? And you don't just give an increase because, time has passed. If the money they're making is sufficient for them to live a good life, then guess what? You don't deserve an increase. And if you deserve an increase, then you should make sure the economy is doing well, so that then you could put forward and say, the people can vote on the issue of increases at a general election. No elected government should make a decision to raise their own pay. It should be put on a ballot at the next election, so that if this pay cycle that you were elected in, this government that's going into play, is getting 4 million a year per MP and 9 million for the Prime Minister, then salary scales should be voted on at the next general election. If people decide, say, this is what we think they should get, and we should have a committee set up to justify that to the people during the campaign, to see why they should vote on these issues. Put it on the ballot, because it's a conflict of interest to go in there and raise your own pay. Alright, so those are simple changes we could put into play that could protect the people, and avoid this situation again, getting the best government in place, and to make sure that we don't keep doing the same thing over and over again, because it's madness. The old system has not been working, and so we need to put things on the ballot that people can decide on. For example, our constitution should dictate how much taxes government can take from people, and not allow individuals to go in there and decide, we're going to raise taxes by 50%, and then the government is taking more of your money than you can keep. No government should be allowed to take more than 15% of a person's income or wealth for taxation purposes. None. And we need to put that on the ballot and lock it in and say, this is not something that you could go in there and vote. We need to put processes and systems in place, and what we need to operate in government, and vote on it at a general election, and embed it in the Constitution, so that we don't have people going in there and creating situations that's in conflict, being able to continue the corrupt behavior of these politicians, because that is how we limit them. We have to limit the corruptions and fix it from the reforming of the Constitution. So this whole idea that we're going to just elect people, change the constitution, appoint a prime minister or appoint a president with no idea what this president is going in to do or no limitations or guidance on his power, then we're asking for trouble. And I know that's the case now, because I remember at a town hall meeting, I think this was in Mandeville, somebody asked pretty much what is the president going to be doing. And the young lady that's in charge of this whole process, this parliamentarian, couldn't say, so she was jokingly saying, oh, that question should be asked at the beginning of the town hall. No, that should be a primary information to people before you had any town hall participation of the people. You should go out there and declare, this is what we're structuring, that is what we're structuring. But again, I'm pointing out the danger towards that, or involving that, when you have only a group of people, a small group of people deciding on what our political system should be, what our elected officials should be, and then forcing it down our throat and say, vote on that. Because then we have no choice. Those are things that should be discussed. Those are things that the population should participate in. Decide on the role and the responsibility of the Prime Minister or a President. Decide on the role of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, and set rules and set policies in the Constitution. And if you're going to have any major changes in those processes, then it's voted in at an election. Or we have to go back and do a referendum, so we don't have people just going in and randomly changing the Constitution. So there are a number of fundamental issues that we have to address. And one of the first things we need to do is tell this present administration, forget the pay hike, we're not going to give it to you. Forget this idea that you're going to sit down and rewrite the Constitution and then push it down our throats and say, this is what we're voting and this is up. No, we need to play a greater role in that. First thing we need to do is set up a national campaign, finance that campaign, educate everybody from the primary school level all the way up to the ordinary guy in the street, and drive them to participate, because we're educating them to let them know this is important and you need to play a role. So good or bad or indifferent, they have a say in how their country is run. I remember before we came to independence, there was a mass campaign across the country about this independence thing and driving people, and they had massive celebrations afterwards because people felt they were a part of the process of going independent. The same thing has to be done here. No politician should have the power to go and dictate what the Constitution should represent. We shouldn't embrace this whole idea that it's political parties that must supply candidates. The people must supply the candidates, whether they're from a political party or not. So we need to reverse all of that. We need to reverse the whole concept that we are working for government. We are the ones that government must hold accountable, and not the government be held accountable for the things they are doing. We have to reverse that. It must be written in the Constitution. If the government is failing to do this, then they must quit or resign. If there are no confidence in the government and they fail at certain things, write a formula in the Constitution that says we don't have to sit down with you for 10 years or 5 years if you're not performing. Automatically, we need to put in the Constitution that if you're a person that's convicted of swindling or cheating or involved in corruption in politics, in government, or anything, and it's proven, then you're barred from running in a general election. If you're a convicted person and you haven't done your time, then you can't run, because technically we can't bar a citizen from running in an election. That's a democracy, because this person might become reformed. Saul of Tarsus, which became St. Paul, was a bloody murderer, but eventually became one of the most prominent prophets or propagators of Christianity and teaching the good. So we can't say we can bar a person from ever running in a general election. If our democracy says citizens have the right to vote, then we can put limits on it. If you're involved in crime, and you're busted and you have to do time, and that time has not been served, then during that period you can't run. That is not to say we can't discuss it, how we can do those things. But those are the things we need to address in discussing our constitutional change, because we want to improve on our government. We also want to look at, things that people think aren't important, like terminologies. Are we going to adapt another system of government from another nation? Are we just going to, take in the American system, for example, or the British system, or another country's system? Are we going to develop our own? Are we going to look at our history and decide, we're a people of African descent, and we should embody within our constitution a representation that it's important that we identify with where the majority of our people are coming from, or if not the vast majority, all our people are coming from, and develop terminologies for our leadership that represent a national, across the board, out of many one people. Should we develop our own terminology for that number one political leader? Should we? Because then we break away from this idea that we're absorbing or just taking something that's been pushed down our throat from a nation that used to oppress us, or their political system. We need to realize that when we embrace, for example, a census, and we break down our census into race, creed, all of that, that is one of the systems of government, or political system, or economic system, that's been advanced by a lot of these countries that practice racism and use racism to keep people apart so that they can oppress and exploit those people. Racism is a political system. Racism is an economic system. Divide and conquer. We should eliminate from our constitution, when doing a census, the only thing a census should do is count the number of the population, and whether that number is broken down into male, female. And so when we have that in place, we lose this whole idea, this whole discussion around this imported idea that Afro-Jamaican, or Asian Jamaican, or Chinese Jamaican, or Indian Jamaican, and all of that mess. We're just Jamaicans across the board. No breaking down of our census in who is Coolie, who isn't Coolie, who is African, who is European, who is Scottish. If you're born Jamaican, you're Jamaican. We don't care what your color or creed or what your history. You're born Jamaican, you're Jamaican. Certainly you privately can hold on to your ancestral roots. That's not an issue. And that might be of great economic value to us. But for national purposes and to build a unified country, we have to get out of this copying racist policies that come out of countries. And I'm talking about even the United States, where the census is used to divide people. And so dividing, we gerrymander political boundaries, because we take censuses knowing that in this particular area 50,000 black slaves or 50,000 Spanish people live, so we're going to gerrymander the border so that they'll never be able to elect an official. Now we need to get rid of that and cleanse ourselves of anything that's going to undermine our democracy. And those are some of the things. Saying all of this to say this, that this whole process of having a discussion around constitutional change should not be just simplified process of a group of people sitting that were elected who are biased and have their own agenda to decide on what the rest of the nation should deem as important to our democracy. We need to have detailed discussions around matters so that we don't end up copying a political system that isn't working for them, and then we want to import it here. And just like a number of economic policies that we see government adapting, they look at North America, they look at Europe, and they just decide, oh, they passed this law, so let's pass it. And I'm going to address the whole marijuana thing, where we sit down and we watch and we lock up our people based on laws that's coming out of the United States and the federal government, when we should decide on our own thing. And I'll maintain again that we have a bunch of attorneys in Jamaica who are complicit and libelous and have been malpracticing the services they give to their clients. because nobody should go to prison for ganja, because ganja is not a dangerous drug. But we have been putting people in prison based on the fact that it's been classed as a dangerous drug or a class 1 drug, whatever they want to call it, because of the US or the UK and all of that. If we're an independent nation, then we have to pass laws and put in our constitution that A, you can't tax but so much of the people's money. B, if the people didn't commit a crime in Jamaica, you can't have them being subject to criminal prosecution by another nation outside of Jamaica. And then after they prosecute them, we ship them off, they do their time, they come back worse than they left here. We should have in our constitution that if a person, a Jamaican, goes into another country and is there permanently as a citizen or resident, that country cannot just have them go to prison and then deport them to Jamaica and have us left in this dilemma of having deportees without resources. If they want them to come back to Jamaica, give them assets and resources and training, so when they get here, when they're in prison, educate them. When they're in prison, give them training so that they have options. So when you deport them, then those people are functional in our society. And we put it in our constitution, in our laws. Say we won't take back anybody. You don't just fly in and dump people on our doorsteps because they were Jamaican and they moved into your country and became criminals there. They're not criminals here. You want them to come back here. Use your resources to give them the assets and the qualifications to come and be of value here, so they're no longer criminals. Because I think what will happen there is, once you know these people are qualified to do things other than they're doing, you're going to keep them. But right now you're dumping them back on us and ruining our economy because you know these people are no value to your economy. I'm just saying, Jamaicans have to be more sophisticated in how we approach our business, how we approach our constitution, the most important document in the country, the number 1 law. This is how we live, this is how we are governed, and put in place things that protect us both internally, externally, from individuals who would exploit us and undermine the nation's interests. So it's more complex than just a simple putting on paper something and then telling us to vote, and we need to establish that. Again, we can write everything in the constitution to protect us, because what just happened with this whole salary thing tells us we need control. And the control, again, is to, any kind of payment or increased salary should be put on the ballot, and every 5 years when we have an election, that's when it's voted on by the majority of people to say we're going to give these politicians an increase. So the objective here and the thing is, we get the most qualified people who are going to be working for the country. And the other thing is that these people going in and knowing that they're not being overpaid will work to ensure that we have deflation, a reduction in inflation and controlling inflation, so their money can be spent and other people can spend there and have a living wage. And so we don't have people sliding into adverse poverty that they can't come out of. And so the politicians now going and will have to work. We have policies that if we have a person that's a Jamaican involved in government and we catch them involved in corruption, then they're barred from running in the election for X amount of years. And the other institution that we must look at in a constitutional reform is the judiciary. How are we going to have constitutional reform without reforming the judiciary? We're going to adopt the same judiciary that we know is grossly corrupt and has not been able to deliver the kind of justice that we know we need. So that has to be organized. We have to develop processes where government that's written in the constitution, that we assess judges during the tenure of their services, whether every 2 years we look at an assessment of the judge and look at their rulings, and we decide and have people either vote on it, that we want these people out because they did XYZ. It's not up to the government to decide on who stays and who doesn't stay. Or we expose these people, and if we have to put them on a ballot as well and vote them out, so that people can decide we don't want these corrupt people in there, and government can't keep them there because we don't want them. Some control. So again, it's a lot to discuss and go through, but you need to engage, you need to become involved, and you need to insist on these changes or discussions around these areas, so we have a better judiciary, so we know we can manage corruption, because so far we haven't been able to correct it because the government officials refuse to put things in place to fix it. We need to implement policies that govern how the judiciary operates, and including how it operates through efficiency. We have technical ways to ensure that the judiciary operates to serve the people and ordinary people. We can put in the Constitution that no law or no rule of the court can be so written that it's confusing to ordinary people or anybody. People who are coming out of high school should be able to read a law, or even younger, and understand it, because we know our children are so intelligent that they're learning things that we learned at high school. So no law should be drafted by government that the language is so technical that ordinary people can't understand it. No law should allow the government to limit a person representing themselves in court, because the processes are so simplified and so set so that anybody can go in and fill out a document and have their matters in front of the court, and it's not just based on them being forced to get attorneys who now are forced and are forced to create expenses that they can't afford, or they can't get an attorney so they can't go to court. So we need to put things in place that's going to protect us and have those things done. Simple things that improve the nation. We can't just adopt another constitutional amendment or government that's going to go in and do the same thing over. It hasn't worked for us. It's not working. So we need to implement those changes. And I'm suggesting these, not dictating to anybody that this is what should be adapted. I'm saying we need to have discussions around these areas that will improve the lives of our people and ourselves. Thank you. Looking forward to another video and following through, helping to improve and build our nation, and encouraging you to participate. Again, understand that you have a role to play, and a role that's significant in all of our lives. Thank you. Have a great one, and see you in a couple days or hours. Bye.